but for that very generous introduction. Well, because I am on a rather time bound, so let me not waste too much of your time. Uh, the topic that I have chosen is something that is of great interest to everyone, and people talk about it. Should there be a small government or a large government? In fact, this debate has gone on long enough. In fact, the American presidential election, which is still not over, has been largely on this. In our own country, we have seen this debate happening. In fact, there is a part of that debate happening on the Delhi roads as we speak today. So it is something that, as an economic theorist, it ought to concern us. So, in fact, there are, as most people who do economics know, that there is a predominantly influential school out of Chicago, which has the maximum number of Nobel Prizes in economics also. So they are the ones who are the proponents of the small government, or so it seems. And of course, everyone else seems to be actually saying that no, the government should be large enough to do various things. For instance, now the Democrats are doing a lot, but we are talking at a time when all governments are busy because of the pandemic. So the pandemic is a bit of a, how shall I say, an outlier. So there would have to be exceptions to whatever examples I gave that would come up. But as we see, that we'll have ways of talking about that too. Let's look at the debate of economic theory about this large versus small. Now, clearly, as soon as you start talking about large versus small, you have to define what is large and what is small. How do you go about defining a large government? Well, in some recent contributions, it's the size of the government spending that has been talked about, as opposed to as a fraction of GDP, for example. A relatively recent piece in the Economic Journal, for instance, concludes that a society can rationalize having a small or large government, and that to achieve credible conclusions about the desirable size of government, we need to improve current knowledge of preferences and the productivity of spending vastly. That is, we need more information. Just government spending is not enough. But you can rationalize having a large government or a small government. It doesn't get us very far. There's another piece about the same time, is that the government can be an obstacle to economic growth when public sector institutions are weak, but is neutral when bureaucratic quality is high. So again, it's not government spending alone. Then there is this paper by Metzler, which is slightly more ancient. The size of the government depends on the relationship between the mean income and to the mean voter income, and so on. So notice that we are not being able to go very far. Now, just as a way of example, why government spending by itself cannot be a major impact, I thought, let me look at some data. Now, here you'll find that these are some advanced countries whose data has been got together. This is spending as a percentage of GDP. Is that a sign of prosperity? Well, these countries are, broadly speaking, fairly prosperous, acknowledged to be. And notice that as a percentage of GDP, the government spending is of, if you say that around 50% is high, then well, they are pretty much there, except for Japan, I think, which is slightly lower. What about, I went back instead of going front. Some of the poor countries of the world, but notice here, or the developing countries, I don't know why China has been plugged in there, but notice that the Chinese figures are very small, at least so they report. 19%, 2000 to 2011. Look at Mexico is 26, our own is about 32. So it can't be that we can claim that we have been, for instance, spending a lot or we have a large government. So therefore, I decided to do the following. I decided to look at a more recent debate between two of the stalwarts of the profession, Buchanan and Musgrave. Now, you have to remember, I mean, the people who know, it's really, it will be a big bore to point out, but Buchanan is of the Chicago school and Musgrave is the Keynesian. The Keynesian meaning the more conservative and, in fact, looking at government support. In 1998, there was a long debate between Richard Musgrave and James Buchanan. And the format was that one day Musgrave would speak and Buchanan would ask questions. The other day, Buchanan would speak and Musgrave would ask. And there's a book which I think people ought to look at. Musgrave was in favor of a beneficial government with large public programs, while Buchanan warned that governments were guided by self-interest, and so they presented two contrasting visions of the state. So Musgrave argued for a government to provide public goods, which the private sector could not, to redistribute wealth and provide social justice and stabilize in inherently unstable capitalist economy. Buchanan pointed out that this was exactly the kind of thing which led to bloated government facing open-ended entitlement claims, resulting in moral depravity. In Buchanan's words, the crucial difference lay in the fact that Musgrave trusted politicians, whereas he does not. So now notice that there is quite strong arguments being put forward on both sides. But notice it is Buchanan who got the Nobel Prize and Richard Musgrave did not. So you can make out where the backing lay. We take a look at the topic from a theoretical point of view. Oops, this is something that is happening consistently. I go back and I will present something which is something different. If we can't quite agree on the size of the government, small versus large, what should be the responsibilities of government? And here I was actually tempted to go into it when I read about President Truman of the United States, who lamented that give me a one-handed economist, because he was really very angry with economists who would sit and pontificate and say that on the one hand we have this and on the other we have another thing. We look at what has been the view about governments or the state right through the ages. And in fact, they are of various schools of thought. They have of various ideas. But look at the kind of things that they said. And I start with the earliest, which is Chanakya in Arthashastra. In fact, all of them begin with that it is the government's duty is to be prosperous, make its country or citizenry prosperous, prosperity. So in the interest of the prosperity of the country, a king should be diligent in removing all obstructions to economic activity. There's a clear instruction of trade being without any restriction. Further, the pursuit of people's welfare, the economic well-being of the society is dependent on the scepter wielded by the king. The maintenance of law and order by the use of punishment is the science of government. And then there are pages and pages of stuff about what kind is a just law and order machinery. It goes on. I place this because this is one of the earliest that you can come across. Okay. So now if I look at something more recent, that is Adam Smith in 1755. So we've jumped about 2000 odd years. Little else is required to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence from the lowest barbarism, but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice, all the rest being brought about by the natural course of things. Notice it's the same thing that is being said. Jump ahead a little bit and look at Milton Friedman. Now, remember that Milton Friedman is one of the most important proponents of the Chicago School. In 1962, he says, and presumably he's one of those who argues or is said to argue for a small government. The government's major function must be to protect our freedom, both from enemies outside and outside our gates and from our fellow citizens, to preserve law and order, to enforce private contracts, to foster competitive markets. All right. So notice that the generality that was being mentioned earlier from Arthashastra to Adam Smith is now being made more and more specific. You have things like enforcing private contracts and fostering competitive markets. Move further down to another person, actually not an economist, but a political scientist, very influential, Mansour Olson. No society can work satisfactorily if it does not have a peaceful order and usually other public goods as well. In fact, in this paper, he has this classification of various types of people. You see, he talks about the kind which comes and raids and goes away. Or you have people who stay in the place and plunder. So he says, makes a distinction, and he says that those who come and raid and go away, they will never foster economic growth. But there'll be some growth even if the person stays there, because he's not going to kill off whatever he can earn. So obviously anarchic violence cannot be rational for a society. The victims of violence and theft lose not only what is taken from them, but also the incentive to produce. There is accordingly little or no production in the absence of a peaceful order. Thus, there are colossal gains from providing domestic tranquility and other basic public goods. So you have here domestic tranquility and other basic public goods as something that the government ought to be producing or looking for. We have more recent publication in this century, actually, from the Pillars of Prosperity from Beasley and Person. The state authority, tax systems, court systems, and democracy co-evolve in a complex web of interdependent causality. So now look at the entire history of our subject, beginning from Arthashastra down to Beasley and Person, through Smith, Milton Friedman. They all seem to be saying the same set of things. Peace, there should be. There should be law and order. There should be public goods, and there should be some kind of the courts and the thing more importantly, the preservation of contracts that are made, how that is going to go through. So regular economic literature resize provides nothing conclusive, while received wisdom across various times and authors seem to completely agree so far as duties for the prosperity of the state are concerned. So instead of size of the government, we look at the list of activities that the government must necessarily engage itself with in order to ensure that the state prospers. And at the same time, we do it using standard modern economic theory as it has developed. So the government is generally assumed to be benevolent, but may act out of self-interest. See the adversarial dialogue between Buchanan and Musgrave, and in which case needs to be closely watched. Must do the following: maintain peace and tranquility, raise adequate, depends on the nature of government taxes, provided public goods of high quality, depends again on the nature of government, maintain courts and see that there is a functioning judiciary providing justice. There is no different opinion on these matters. So why is this so? Now look at the economic paradigm that runs today. Now, the economic paradigm has been shot a little bit because of the pandemic that we are being forced with, but largely the idea behind the economic paradigm everywhere around the world, except for one or two countries which are marginal, is something that Danny Roderick of MIT, or maybe now Harvard, calls the SLP regimes. Now, what are SLP regimes? SLP regimes are: S is for stabilize, liberalize, and privatize. Now, stabilize means stabilize the level of government expenditures. Look at the debate that is happening right now, is how large can the deficit go? So expenditures should be kept in check, even now when things are getting out of hand. Liberalize is allow people to trade, so don't have any trade barriers. And privatize is, of course, reduce the public sector. Now, all of them are a shrinkage of the set of government activities. And the key feature is, however, that markets should be competitive and free. So I'm going to begin now by using a little bit of why is it that competitive markets are supposed to be providing you with everything? Or what is the argument? Now, the lure of competitive markets has been somewhat dimmed in the light of the pandemic in the light of financial crises and stuff like that. But people seem to mull it over and say that no, well, maybe they'll come back and things will work all right. But let me look at the argument first. Competitive markets, the only thing that really attract competitive markets is that competitive markets are supposed to ensure efficiency. And this is the first stumbling block, because what is efficiency? And one of the problems of economics has been that technical terms are also English words. So whereas efficiency is a very technical term, it's also is used in common language. And therefore people, when they talk that, this thing is efficient, that thing is efficient, they are perhaps not very accurate when they are talking about these things. Now, let me just begin by saying that efficiency comes out of the following. If you have a given state of the economy is efficient, if there is no other redistribution which would make someone better off and no one worse off. So, if for instance, I was given the task of distributing 1,000 rupees amongst all of us who are here, there are various ways of distributing it. I could look at the numbers that we are here, divide 1,000 by that number, and then equally everyone gets something. Or I could say that since I'm doing the heavy lifting and I should get most of the 1,000 rupees or all of it. Or it could be because Shomesh Mathur has been the one who organized it. He and I, we share, and no one else gets anything. Now, if I were to pose the question, which of these distributions is efficient? The answer is every one. Each one is efficient. And because if you test the definition that I gave you, they would satisfy this, because anytime you want to change this and take money away, let's say distribution that gave everything to me, you want to redistribute to take money from me, you'll make me worse off. So basically the test will fail. Well, how is efficiency ensured by competitive markets? So essentially, efficiency means that there has been no wastage, because had there been any wastage, then the wastage or what was being wasted could be used to make someone better off and leave no one worse off, right? Because the wastage could be saved. So how does the competitive market get to an efficient state? Now, these results go back quite some time. Standard, people teach them, but still, it would be easy because to sort of go over the argument, if not in great detail or in great generality, but at least simply so that we can use them. So what are the conditions satisfied at a competitive equilibrium? Oops, sorry. Oh, there are, as I said, defined efficiency. There are three conditions at an efficient state. So let's take it like this. What is an efficient state? What happens at an efficient state? As I said, no one could be, it is efficient if no one can be made better off and leave no one worse off. So there has to be efficiency in consumption. So there's an equality of marginal rates of substitution across individuals. Efficiency in production, that is the equality of the marginal rate of technical substitution across sectors, and overall efficiency. that is the common value of the marginal rate of substitution, the first condition, is equal to the rate of transformation along the production possibility locus. What happens at an equilibrium, for example? Demand is equal to supply. Demand comes from maximizing satisfaction subject to budget constraints. So the relative prices are equal to the marginal rates of substitution, relative price of factors equal to MRTS, and price equals marginal cost. And as you can see then, that all the marginal rates of substitution being equal to the given price, everyone facing the same price, you have the conditions for efficiency dropping out. Now the problem is going to arise. I spent 2 minutes on this. Is going to arise whenever at the equilibrium there is some problem in these conditions. You know, this is a diagram that I think is useful, because just to put in the previous slide in position, you have a production possibility locus. That is the locus of all. Let's say there are only two goods, X and Y. So the maximum amounts of each of the goods that can be produced given the resources and technology. Let's say P is a point which shows is a point that can be produced. Then we can draw a box diagram and divide it amongst the two individuals. A point such as E, and notice that the slope at P has to equal the slope at these common indifference curves. And this is what is required for efficiency. Now, the first stumble to this theory, incidentally, this result of that the equilibrium implies efficiency has a name. It's called the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. It stumbles badly, actually, as I'm going to argue right through my lecture. Is first of all, when there are externalities. Now, what are externalities? Externalities are things when the decision maker can't control something while taking his decision. For instance, I can't control what my neighbor is going to do, right? And if my neighbor creates too much of a nuisance, then I am worse off, but I can't control him. Public goods are one such area where you have externalities. And the classic example of public goods is, of course, national defense. Why is that so? Because if I'm asked, how much would you like to contribute to national defense? Then I can always say that, well, I can't be excluded. The government cannot actually say that we will have a national defense of whole of India minus Anjan Mukherjee. I can't be excluded, so let them do whatever they wish. Now, there is a classic story. I think I don't tell stories because I'll run out of time. The externalities in production, pollution of various kinds. There is a firm located downstream of a river, and upstream there's a firm which pollutes the river. The downstream firm requires clean water, so there is pollution. In all such cases, there is a breakdown between private benefits and social benefits, and the links between competitive equilibrium and efficiency are broken. Now, I will not go through the public goods example because I think it is something that maybe everyone is aware, but
Professor Mukherjee, I have a clarificatory question.
yeah.
When you talked about the externalities, are you bringing in the stability, uniqueness, or existence of the
No,
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 they are
no.
they're different.
I am not talking about stability, uniqueness, or any such thing. For that, you have to call me another day and I'll talk about them.
All
But
right, okay. Yeah.
I just talk about equilibrium and existence. Okay. Here, with externality, it's going to be very difficult even to define an equilibrium, but that can be done. Uh, but here, what happens? What happens is that, and it's known that we introduce taxes. Why? Because the taxes are there to actually see to it that people perform appropriately so that the efficiency conditions are restored. Again, this thing was argued against by a lot of people, mainly Chicago people, and you had the kind of cause kind of argument saying that you should not have the government charging taxes, you just assign property rights. And there are these famous examples of trains running through the Midwest of the US, burning corn crops and so on, how to treat them and who owns the railroad track or who owns the right. So there are these interesting things. We will not get into it right now. We'll come back to it. The other major case that came up is the case of asymmetric information. You see, what I'm talking about are things which you disturb the equilibrium efficiency link. One was the externalities for which you require taxes or assigning property rights, depending on what political school you belong to. Now we come to asymmetric information. Now, asymmetric information is something that people were not aware of. The two of the people who got the Nobel Prize for work on asymmetric information were Akerlof and Stiglitz, and they noticed this phenomena because Akerlof used to be then in advising the Indian Planning Commission sitting in Parliament Street. And I used to make my students read the Akerlof famous paper, mainly because that's the only paper I know which has references to things like Times of India and stuff. And Stiglitz identified the problem of asymmetric information because he was sitting in Nairobi. So, because they were sitting in places where markets were not very well developed, they noticed that there was this business where the buyers and sellers could not talk about or could not transmit information about the quality of the product they're selling. And in fact, markets may disappear. For example, look at the thing that I'm talking about or that I put up in the slide. Let's suppose look at the used car market. Any number of buyers and sellers, assume. And suppose buyers are willing to pay 1 lakh for a good used car and none for a bad used car. Why would you buy a bad used car? Well, sellers are willing to sell for 80,000. So clearly there's no mismatch, right? If quality of used cars were known, good cars would be sold at some price between 80,000 and 1 lakh, and bad cars would not get sold. However, now buyers know that 25% of the cars are bad and they have no way of knowing which one it is. So any car they think has a 75% chance of being good and a 25% chance of being a dud. So they'll make this calculation that it's worth only 1 into 7.75 plus 0 into 0.25, and that's only 75,000 to the buyer. And the sellers are out because they only sell at 80 and the market just disappears. So the existence comes into question. There is no market at all. So what happens? What is required? certifying agencies. Certifying agencies, agencies which enter into this picture saying that, look, this car is good, that car does not have the certificate, so good cars sell at price. You have that happening anytime. In fact, the kind of certification that we researchers and teachers get because of various things that UGC sets up, or the certifying agency of UGC certifying that a certain institution is worth going to, all these are parts of the same thing. So you need certifying agencies. And that is because of this asymmetric information, because by the look of things, you may not be able to find out what is the quality of the product. But this is not all, as I'm going to argue. And this is something which I came across earlier. And it is this: contractual obligations. Any sale may be concluded when there is a contractual agreement between a buyer and seller, even vegetable markets. Even if when you go to vegetable markets and you try to buy, let's say, potatoes, there is a deal that is struck that you buy a kilo of potatoes at this price. So the deal is that the seller would give you exactly 1 kilo of potatoes and you would pay whatever, 40 rupees or whatever. So the supplier can say that, okay, if I sell this guy instead of a kilo, I sell them only 900 grams. He's not going to notice. Should I do it? The question is that if he can get away by selling 900 grams, then he's going to do it. And if I have a torn note, which I can pass off, although it may not be legal tender, I'm going to pass it off by folding it or something. So, what incentives are there for the agreement to be honored or maintained? None at all, unless if there is some regulation, or you can't have people standing around watching each and every buyer and seller and so on and so forth. In fact, forget about vegetable market where it is impossible. But even what kind of guarantee do you have when you buy, let's say, a television set? I mean, true, there is some guarantee, but then you'll find out the thing which has gone bad is not really covered. So markets here would fail also. I mean, for instance, in India, we find if we have a flat which we are not living in, we'd rather keep it locked up than give it out for rent. So look at the colossal waste that happens, because a lot more flats would be out on rent, the rents would become lower, right? The flats would get maintained, everyone would be better off. But the reason you don't do it is because when you need the flat, the guy will not move. This doesn't happen if there is a good uh, law and order machinery that you can actually enforce a contract. We come next to decision making under uncertainty. And this is where I think uh, we are at today. For instance, I was asked the other day whether I'd be available for a function in. Now, to answer to that is that if everything remains as is now, then I'll be available. But if I fall ill or something, for which there is a chance which I don't know what it is, I will not be. So I can't give you a definite answer. So just think of a two-period problem. Now, this is a simple problem that I have set up just for the purpose of this discussion. Think about consumers worried about consumption today and consumption tomorrow. Just two periods. What can the fellow do? fellow can consume something today, some amount of money that he starts off with, and he can sell his labor and get some wages. Now, all the one variables are today's variable. The two variables are tomorrow's variables. Tomorrow's variables you don't know. So the typical consumer problem that we consider is maximize the utility subject to budget constraint, but the budget constraints are of two periods. In fact, I should tell you that the assumption is that you can't take consumption today, save it and save it for consuming tomorrow. You can only take the money that you can save and use it for consumption tomorrow. Meanwhile, you don't know what tomorrow's prices are going to be. You don't know what tomorrow's wages are going to be. Anyway, if you perform this, then the thing is that the marginal rates of substitution between consumption good 1 and 2, which are the only two things that you are interested in, happens to be P2 upon P1. Now notice, what is P2? P2 is uncertain. You expect what tomorrow's prices are going to be. But that's what you expect. What I expect is maybe a different P2. So if there is an equilibrium, then my marginal rate of substitution for this C1, C2 is going to differ from yours. And the classic equality of marginal rates of substitution across individuals at an equilibrium break down. Everyone faces the same prices. But what has happened is that our expectations are different. And so we have to actually create a kind of a problem. I mean, people would say that all this is happening because there is no market in which tomorrow's traders can trade with today's traders. Fine, I understand that, but still there is an inefficiency that is there. What do you need to do about this? Well, the more you have uncertainty, notice that you need to see that P2 by P1 are same across individuals. You find that a lot of people who do macro, they come across a term called static expectations. You expect today's prices to happen tomorrow. If you do that, then everyone expects the same price, and then this problem bang disappears. Or if everyone has the same expectations. But then what is the uncertainty? So there is a problem that this has happened. And the kind of equilibrium that I am envisaging in the world of uncertainty is what is called a temporary equilibrium. Now, this temporary equilibrium owes its origin to Hicks's value and capital, where Hicks talks about, the Hicksian week. He says that there is 1 week in which the producers produce and take their products to the market, but they do that on the expectation of what prices they are going to get in the market, and they come to the market, and then trading takes place. So here, on the basis of expectations of the futures, you trade today, and there's an equilibrium if so. When you move on, next period, there is another equilibrium, and so on and so forth. So trades across dates, if required and feasible, would require stronger regulation. I mean, notice now there are certain kinds of things that you can do. You can trade across, you can buy today things available tomorrow. But the tomorrow's fellow can't buy things available today. That's where the problem lies. That's why there is an asymmetry. Now, clearly with the pandemic, next period's wages, for example, may be quite uncertain. So the formulation reflects current situations and in fact calls out for intervention to say the least. What can you do? The kinds of failures indicated can come about because of policies which make the future earnings uncertain. So if you do something today which makes next period's wages uncertain, then there is an uncertainty that seems to be creeping into our notion of equilibrium. Conversely, increasing confidence or reducing uncertainty will have beneficial effects so far as the efficiency-inefficiency trade-off is concerned. So, corrective steps, externalities, market failures, either Pigouvian taxes or assigning or protecting property rights. That's the cause thing. So traditional textbook taxes or property rights. Asymmetric information, certifying quality. Now, certifying quality can be done a lot by private agencies, but for certain things, only the government will have to do. For instance, certifying doctors or certifying hospitals. Who would certify the quality of hospitals? Who would certify and indeed for teachers? So contractual arguments, the kind that we talked about, should be protected by courts of law. Violation should lead to quick redressal. In fact, I didn't have time, and I think I'm running out of time. I had examples of where you could, in fact, introduce things like penalties and the costs of finding out when someone is creating a nuisance and so on and so forth. And then that would coerce people to be trading according to the competitive things. So all these are required so that the government has to step in and perform the roles that it has to do. Even the Cosian solution introduced to lower the role of the government require government courts in the protection of property rights. I mean, after all, if your property rights are going to be violated, what do? You have to go to the courts. And finally, ensuring people's belief about what lies ahead will be required. People's trust have to be earned. And that the only kind of thing, that agency which can do this is the government. So the extent of government activities, and here I'm quoting someone who is not an economist, is a psychologist, Schwartz, who says this: when, however, the things we are talking about are trivial, designer jeans, compact discs, etc., you can depend on markets. That's what he was saying. But when we are talking about things that we are judged by society to be too important, things like food, housing, education, health care, transportation, jobs, the market would be unacceptable. But he's making a mistake, because you see, as we just went through, that even designer jeans or compact discs or deodorant soaps, these markets also require, I mean, just the threat that, look, if you violate, then you're going to be hauled up before a court and fined, and no questions asked, right? So that has to be there. That he didn't realize. So what incentives do the government officials have to carry out these tasks? That is where the problem arises. Clearly, markets may not retain efficiency on their own, and governments have major roles to play. Scams and frauds may result essentially because of these reasons. And this is precisely why people may conclude that government should be kept small. The government has a major role to perform, going back to what people like Chanakya and Friedman said. But look at Friedman saying that, look, it must be the case that contracts have to be maintained. Not competitive only. We have discussed why these roles are necessary to maintain the current paradigm functioning. We have also discussed why these roles may be difficult to perform. And then there is the role of civil society and free press, because that is what keeps things running. And role of the private sector. In fact, would you believe it, last month, Luigi Zingales and others, they brought out an ebook, which is Milton Friedman 50 years later. It's pro-market. It just came out in late November 2020. And the argument for corporations having social responsibilities. I mean, there are people arguing both for and against. And it's available. So this by it, is by no means is something which is a complete thing, that the answers are all there. But at least I hope I have been able to put before you the complex nature of the requirement. If we are going to believe in competitive markets, then we better believe in the government being able to perform all these roles. Otherwise, there's not much point in believing in competitive markets. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mukherjee. It reminded us of the government slogan nowadays, max governance and minimum government. If at all you can relate it to what's happening today. And with all pressures all around to legalize MSPs, and just wondering where would the efficiency go if it is all legalized. But in any case, brilliant arguments, and so the floor is open for discussion, observations, and questions, if any. Please unmute yourself and you can pose a question.
Sorry?
I am Paras.
Paras, can you be a little louder?
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah, I can now hear you. Yes.
Yes, sir. Sir, I have three questions.
One at a time, please. Don't ask me questions all at one go.
Yes, sir. So my first question is on optimal size of government. So my question is there a uniform optimal size for government, or does the optimal size of government depends on factors like human development, institutional and other social economic factors?
Well, let me try to answer this. First of all, notice that optimal immediately brings up who is doing the optimizing. In fact, you see, if you look at the various roles that I have spelled out and why markets may fail and why the government or agencies which are required, when after all the judiciary or the law and order mechanism, all these things have to be supported by the government. And the government has to see that these function. Now, if you are optimizing something, then what is in your optimand? What is the function you're optimizing? When you say that I want an optimal government, it's optimal for whom? That is the first question. So notice that's not an easy question, because what I have led out one by one are various roles. Each of them are very necessary. Without them, you cannot function. There's no optimality involved here. Now that you say that, look, I just want to look at only two things, and then you can define what is the optimal for those two things that you mentioned. So which two things will you choose? Your second question?
Sir, my second question is, given the
Could you
less
speak up,
proportion,
please? Uh,
given the less proportion of skilled labor, less development, weaker institutions, sir, if reduction in government size taken place, then will private sector going to compensate for the reduction in the government size?
you're talking about how the government should be run. I'm not talking about them. About whether policy A or whether you have elections here and there. I mean, these have got nothing to do with what I said just now. The government has to manage on its own. Now, of course, to a certain extent, the government can function in a much better way if people are well behaved, they listen to whatever things are being told to them. If people don't lie, they don't cheat, then a lot of things are not required. Okay? So basically, the government has to do all of them. They have to see to it that the education, for instance, it's only recently that ethics have started functioning in the business schools. I'm really surprised. When we were young, we learned ethics at home. It hadn't, it wasn't something that was to be taught. So things have changed. Now you have to tell people to be ethical, to not to lie, not to do this, not to do that. So unfortunately, so more work. The third question.
No, sir, I get the answers in the two questions.
Okay.
For my third question.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm Suruchi. I have one question. Sir, in the condition of India, the property rights are not well defined in India, and we have a lot of inequality in
Of course. Of course.
property access. Okay, so in
Yes.
this scenario, if you try to establish some competitive market, you want to give more power to private sector, then is it not?
No, but
Uh,
property, look, property rights have to be well defined, right? But
yeah.
it's that's not the end of it. I mean, you give me the right to own this plot of land. But suppose someone comes and beats me up and takes away that plot of land.
Mhm.
What is there to stop that from happening? It can only be stopped if the courts support me. If the courts
Yes.
take 15 years or 20 years to decide whether or not I have a case, I'm told, for instance, I'll give you an example why the courts are more problems for the government. Some of us, I'm giving my example, some of us have a problem with our pension. We are not getting it.
Mhm.
We filed a case in 2009. That case has not yet been heard by the High Court. We are sitting in 2020. It's finished almost. So 11 years it's been there. And when our lawyer tried to argue that, look, it's a pension case, so please give us an early date, our lawyer said that he was asked how many people have died.
Mhm.
Fortunately or unfortunately, none of us had died, so we didn't get a quick enough date.
Okay.
So property rights are ill-defined, true. We should define property rights and we should protect them. That is where the problem lies. Protection.
Sir, sir, from here the question is, if we want to give, even if we try to give equal property rights, given the kind of population we have and the amount of land we have, so that is where the problem is. If we talk about ethics and all, then there will be, if we go for equal distribution for everyone, then competitive markets will not survive in that case.
Sorry, I didn't get you. What is the question?
Sir, if we talk about ethics, competitive market with ethics,
Yes.
and we want to give property rights, we want to distribute equal property rights also, then do you think there is an ideal situation in which will benefit everyone?
Well, you answer the question here. Can we benefit everyone? I don't know. My life is finished. You see, you guys are much younger than me. You have a lot to see. I don't know whether you'll see it. I won't see it.
Okay.
So the problem is that what is the best deal that can happen? The best
Yeah.
deal that can happen is everyone says that we must follow competitive markets right from the time of, but at the same time, what I'm arguing is that there must be some support from the government just to see that the competitive solutions are not always very nice solutions. This is what
Hmm.
I'm trying to argue.
Okay.
The only thing that you can argue is what I have argued, that the competitive solution will not involve wastage. Any other solution would involve a wastage.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Any any more questions? So, if there are none, then let me thank Professor Mukherjee uh, for giving his time and delivering his lecture talk. We are thrilled and honored to listen to you. And uh, who said that retirement is a deterrent to work? Please see his book. Yeah, his book on mathematical methods and economic theory, which I used last semester, Professor Mukherjee and Subrata Gho. So it's a brilliant one, uh, and lucid. Yes, was there a question, Shaunak? You want to speak?
From my side, I don't have questions, but I will echo Professor Mathur. By the way, I'm Shaunak. I just joined the department. It was a pleasure having you here, Professor Mukherjee, and it was wonderful and very illuminating to listen to your lecture. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for listening to me patiently for almost an hour. But I tried to make it worth your while. I think you
Yeah.
really, I have now decided that tell people that unless you fix the courts and the law and order situation, unless you fix that, it
Sure.
to do what policies. But it must be the case, by and large, our laws are fair. They are not implemented properly.
Mm-hmm.
You see, I'll give you an example. Immediately after retirement, I was I got into something which I had never done before. That is the LSE and Oxford University uh, set up the International Growth Center,
IGC, yeah.
in Patna. Now, Patna also happens to be my hometown. So people immediately came to me saying that, look, you must help run this place. And the years, if you remember, when I retired, this happened just as I was going to retire. I retired 2010. So I was approached by LSE people in 2009 saying, I said, "Okay, look, I have nothing to do. I have no pension because I just filed a case. So I needed some support. So they said, all right, help us set it up. That's also the time when Nitish Kumar had just become Chief Minister of Bihar. And that was a time when there was really fantastic expectations being set up. In fact, we wrote a piece on Bihar.
Mhm.
If you are interested, it's Rao and Pangadia have a collection of our work. There we saw that, you see, one thing that Nitish Kumar had instituted was the fast court action. So what he got was he got the Chief Justice of the Patna High Court and the Inspector General of Police of Patna to sit down together to devise a method so the courts were given fast track. Now, you see, immediately criminals knew that now just a case being lodged meant that they would be up for decision within a few days. That worked. That worked fantastically well. And, anyway, but that didn't last. People didn't realize what a fantastic move it was. But neither the chief minister nor the other politicians, they backed it up. So we need something like that. You see, right now, for example, I'm told in a lot of institutions, someone takes a wrong decision, then you approach the institution head saying that, no, why are you doing this to me? I mean, this is not fair or something. They say, go to the courts. Now, if you go to the courts, then basically you will never be heard. Now, this is bad. So, this is causing a lot of. So, it doesn't really matter what policies you follow, but these are simple things. I'm afraid a lot of my colleagues are talking about this policy, that policy, and so on, but they're not talking about this. And I did mention to a large number of, I mean, a lot of the people writing are people I've taught earlier. I wish to tell them that if you don't do this, I wouldn't have passed you. But it is true. This is the first, and you people are young people, so you should emphasize that. Look, it doesn't really matter. People are saying that, look, big words are used that, capitalist and neoliberal and this and that. Of course, but unless this thing happens, you can get some kind of a decision fairly, then things don't happen.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
mean, for instance, in a lot of places, uh, you have read about, you go out in the streets today, you'll find lots of people moving about without wearing a mask, right?
Yeah.
That's not fair, actually. The government is trying to do a lot, and you just have to wear a mask, right? Now, notice the problem that is not going to be solved by telling them that you're going to be fined 2,000 rupees. Why? Because that gives the chance to whoever is going to check them to earn a side, right? So I don't know. I think people have to be taught to behave properly. No, in India, for instance, the number of road deaths are so high because of why? Because people drive on the wrong side. Now, why do they drive on the wrong side? They believe they won't be caught. If, for instance, you are caught and your license is seized and you're not allowed to drive again, then there should be something that happens immediately. So I think but this topic that I've chosen for you to talk to you about today is something that is alive. I was very happy to note. You should look at that collection of, where people are talking about, presumably saying that corporate responsibilities are very high. See, Friedman said that if it is a competitive market, you're too small a part of the entire thing. So what can you do? If you are if you are a Google or a Facebook or Microsoft, you certainly have a social responsibility. And maximization of profit is not or should not be your prime concern. But people who interpret Friedman, they forget about all this. They don't even recall that Friedman wrote that markets need to be protected so that everything is actually that contracts are actually so that I think needs to be talked about. It's not being talked about enough.
Right. Okay, Professor Mukherjee,
Well, thank you, thank you.
thank you, and I'll be I'll be talking to you later,
Yeah, sure.
right? And thank all for participating, and I hope you can pursue this work at your end. Maybe it becomes you can identify a research problem of your own, and I'm talking to the PhD scholars. So quite interesting thoughts. We've also recorded this. So in case you need a recording, please write to me or Shaunak, and we'll be happy to share. And we'll also mail a copy to Professor Mukherjee for his records.
Yeah, please. I'd like to see what I sound like myself. Because you see, there are 2 or 3 things which I have always done in my life while I taught. I
Yes.
use a blackboard and
Yeah.
chalk.
Yeah.
I don't like using slides because slides seem to make it, you know, you lose the spontaneity that comes when you are teaching.
Yes.
I always walk about. I can't sit at one place and talk. All right. And third is this technology. I mean, true, I've been using laptops and so on, but sometimes things go wrong. I mean, uh, I found that with Google Meet, for example, I could not upload my presentation the other day. I was speaking somewhere, and that created a bit of a problem uh, because mainly for the audience. I mean, not for me. I can speak, but the audience, they have to visualize each point. Right? Okay.
All right, sir. So we'll be logging off now. thank you so much, and bye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good
Bye-bye.
evening. Oh, I have to stop sharing, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, I've given it back.
All right.